Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host, Dr. W.F. Strong. Our guests today are the subject of a new HBO documentary that is being highly praised called The Case Against 8. Their new book, Redeeming the Dream, The Case for Marriage Equality, is the focus of our interview today, and it's a kind of companion piece to The Case for 8. I'm really honored to have David Boies and Ted Olson on Good Books Radio. They were the opposing attorneys for Gore versus Bush in 2000. David Boies was Gore's attorney, and Ted Olson was Bush's attorney. Both are on Time's list of the 100 most influential people in the world. Both have argued cases before the Supreme Court many, many times. Ted Olson says that in his office, people are most fascinated not with his pictures taken with Ronald Reagan or with George Bush or world dignitaries. They are most fascinated with his collection of Supreme Court quilled pins. You see, every time a person argues before the Supreme Court, they get a quilled pin. And Ted Olson has, get this, 70 of them. Boies and Olson stepped across traditional political lines to form a legal dream team to take on California's anti-gay Proposition 8 referendum. This was harder for the Republican Ted Olson because many, like Limbaugh, saw him as a traitor. And the liberals that he wanted to help were suspicious. They thought he could be a mole of sorts. David had to put up with some suspicion, too, with liberals wondering why he was hanging out with the enemy. But Boies and Olson overcame all of that and joined forces to convince the Supreme Court to rule that Prop 8 was unconstitutional. This is important because this was the tipping point for legalizing gay marriage across the country. They believe the die is cast. It will, they believe, soon be legal in every state. I want to thank our underwriter, audiobooks.com, for sponsoring Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is where your first book is free, including today's book, Redeeming the Dream. Let's talk now with David Boies and Ted Olson. Well, you guys have had quite a tour.
Yeah, but it's been very, very gratifying. Since our book, Redeeming the Dream, was published just a week ago, this Tuesday, we have had an opportunity to talk about the book, to talk about our journey, and to talk about our collaboration in New York and in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. and San Francisco. We're headed to Los Angeles today. We've had an enormously enthusiastic reception because people yearn to learn about how you could take an issue like this to challenge a constitutional amendment in the most populous state of the United States, and to bring together people to help achieve the dream of gay and lesbian citizens to have an opportunity for equal access to fundamental rights in this country. We've been so gratified by the reception that we've had.
Is this the best thing you've ever done?
I will say, I speak, and I think David will then have an opportunity to say something, but I think it's the most gratifying, inspiring moment in our professional lives. Together, David and I have practiced law for nearly 100 years.
Wow.
We've handled lots of interesting and exciting cases, but the human emotion and the impact on individuals and the lives of persons that we've had contact with is so inspiring and so gratifying. There's nothing that I have done in my professional or my personal life that has been so gratifying to me.
Is that the same for you, David?
I certainly feel the same way. The lives that we've been able to change, the pain and the damage that we've been able to, in part, remove and mitigate, I think has been part of what has been the most satisfying legal case of my career.
Well, David, I have a question for you in particular because I was, as I was reading your cross-examination of the depositions, if you can use those words together.
Sure.
I was reminded of something that Clarence Darrow once said, that he said, if you want to defeat prejudice, the easiest way to do it is to make it defend itself. And you seem to do that beautifully in those depositions.
Exactly. And just as Clarence Darrow did in the Scopes trial, in the Perry trial, we put Fear and Prejudice on trial, and Fear and Prejudice lost.
Yeah, big time.
Because when you expose Fear and Prejudice to the light of day, and you expose it to cross-examination, and you make people stand up in court and answer questions about why they are discriminating, it becomes clear that there is no legitimate basis for depriving certain citizens of the rights everybody else enjoys. And that's true whether it's based on race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation, or any of the other characteristics that people differ in.
Dr. Strong, you make a very, very good point about Clarence Darrow. It's fairly interesting that the judge in our case wanted to have a trial so that there would be evidence and cross-examination on all of these issues that affect gay and lesbian citizens, discrimination, marriage, laws that prohibit relationships with one another, psychology, raising of children, and things like that. And our opponents did not want a trial. Now, what does that tell you?
Yes.
That they did not want this all exposed in open court where they would have to put on their case and expose themselves to cross-examination such as David's, as you mentioned in your remarks. It's really quite significant.
Have either of you ever read the trial transcript for Oscar Wilde's trial?
I have read portions of that, and I've studied it a little bit. It's very, very interesting.
Well, he would be so pleased because, he went to jail for 2 years, solitary confinement for 2 years for being gay.
Yes.
Yes.
And I found it remarkable that they were not only they imprisoned him, but they cruelly imprisoned him, meaning they took away all his books. They gave him no books. They gave him no paper to write with. They took away all the things that meant something that was his life. They took it away to punish him.
And destroyed his career.
Yes. He was, after that, he was finished. He was a pariah. No one would associate with him. So it's 100 years later, country, your victory is one for him, really.
It is indeed. And in this country, much more recently, you couldn't even be employed by the federal government in any capacity.
That shocked me.
If you were gay or lesbian. You couldn't be a lawyer. You couldn't be a mail clerk. You couldn't be a typist. You couldn't do anything for the federal government. And that persisted into the late 1970s. So our history of brutal discrimination against people based on sexual orientation is far too recent for any of us to forget.
Well, what's going to happen in Texas? Our governor says that homosexuality is a lot like alcoholism; it can be treated. So, and your primary litigant is Perry. Maybe we need Perry versus Perry.
Well, yeah.
That's very good. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's very unfortunate. I think that is ignorance speaking, and I think that it is particularly unfortunate and damaging when it comes from a high public official that people inherently respect and listen to. I think much more important is the federal district court judge in Texas who ruled that there was no rational basis to discriminate against gay and lesbian citizens, and that depriving gay and lesbian citizens of the right to marry violated the United States Constitution. And I think that federal court opinion is much more reflective of reality, and I think much more reflective of what the real sense is of people in Texas and people all across the country. Because we are an inclusive society. We are a society that believes in equal rights. And we've deprived many people, based on gender, based on race, based on religion, based on sexual orientation, of those rights. But we've come to realize that that is wrong. And I hope that everybody across the country, including the governor and the junior senator from your state, comes to recognize that as 75 to 80% of everybody under 30 has recognized. 75 to 80% of everybody under 30 is in favor, substantially in favor, of marriage equality. That is the future. And I think it is important for all political leaders to recognize not only what is right, but also what the future of this country is.
30 years ago, I was teaching a class at Oregon State University on communications law, and I asked my students then, what will be the civil rights issue of your time? And they said that it would be gay rights. And so they knew it 30 years ago, and today on college campuses, it's a non-issue.
Absolutely. With people under 30, it's like 75 to 80% all across the country support marriage equality. And you talk to young people, just as you alluded to, they don't understand why there's an issue at all. Over and over, young people come to talk to us and say, well, why is this happening? And I want to echo what David said with respect to statements by public officials that reflect ignorance or whatever, I don't know, but it's demeaning to a substantial segment of our population. And I'm including not just gay and lesbian citizens, but their mothers and their fathers, their family members, their co-workers, who can understand the pain that that sort of thing causes. One of the reasons that we got involved in this case is because we were helped to understand that by people that talked to us about this case, about the suicide rate among young adolescents, teenagers who are struggling with their sexual identity and feel that it's going to be so damaging to them, and they'll be so excluded because if they acknowledge to themselves that they are gay. And when states like Constitution, Texas, other states put in the Constitution that the most treasured relationship between people who love one another, that is to say marriage, is denied to gay and lesbian persons, that licenses discrimination. It says to all of our citizens, well, these gay and lesbian individuals are not equal to us. They're somehow different. They're not okay. And all sorts of private acts of discrimination stem from that. If our government, as one of our plaintiffs put it, we described this in our book, one of our plaintiffs put it, our government is supposed to protect us, not to say that we're different and to stigmatize us.
I'm a bit younger than you guys, just but 10 years or so. And like you, I think I grew up not knowing gay people. I knew them, but didn't know I knew them. And,
Exactly.
At what point did you have your epiphany?
For me, it was 2004. Prior to that time, I had been generally in favor of gay and lesbian rights in terms of employment and the like, and housing. I'd never really focused on the marriage issue. And then Gavin Newsom in San Francisco permitted people to get a marriage license, regardless of gender and sexual orientation. And you had people from all over the country, all over the world, flying to San Francisco to stand in line all night to get a marriage license. And you saw the joy and the hope and the expectation on those people's faces. And I couldn't understand, seeing that, why in the world we as a society would try to deprive these people of this important right, why we would try to keep them from the joy and the satisfaction and the celebration that marriage could bring them, particularly when it didn't help anybody to do that. And that was really, for me, the first time that I came to grips with the real irrationality and evil of discriminating against people based on sexual orientation as to whether or not they could marry.
And for you, Mr. Olson?
Well, I grew up, David did also grew up in California. I never did understand I never did accept or understand discrimination against people who were gay, and like you and like David, there were people around me that I know now were gay, and I didn't realize it at the time. But to the extent that I focused on this issue at all, I defaming, putting gay and lesbian individuals in boxes and treating them badly, it just never seemed right to me. In fact, early on, someone brought my attention to this when we got involved in this case. A number of years ago, we had an argument over lunch, and I was the person defending the right of gay and lesbian individuals to get married. Marriage itself was something that a lot of people hadn't thought of with respect to gay and lesbian individuals, but it seemed to both of us, both David and I, as if you would just talk to people and realize the damage that's done by discrimination and stigma, and because if we say these things about people or we put laws that exclude them, it causes more and more people to be afraid to identify who they are. This is part of their identity. And when you're forced to conceal your identity in society, the damage psychologically that does is immense. And so many people have decided now that because there's greater and greater acceptance, that they will come out and open up with respect to their identity, and that's causing their parents and friends and other people to say, oh my gosh, we were grievously wrong when we discriminated against people like them.
Well, I think your book is an epiphany for many, or will be, because there are many things in it that even though I consider myself fairly liberal, there's certain things that I didn't realize, like the suicide rate. I also liked where David pointed out in the book that when African Americans were freed, when the slaves were freed, the first thing they did was get married as a celebration of freedom.
Yes, and as a recognition that they were now equal, and that they could now have the kind of families, the kind of security, the kind of relationships that we associate with freedom and liberty.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you say to people who say, well, okay, if the government can't tell you who you can marry, how can they tell you how many you can marry?
Well, that's quite different. And it's quite different for two reasons. First, there's a substantial body of evidence, and you can debate it one way or another, but there's a substantial body of evidence that says that people with multiple spouses raise considerable problems for society. Mm-hmm. It is abusive for women. Mm-hmm. It is abusive and harmful to children in many situations. And so unlike the case of depriving gay and lesbian citizens of the right to marry, there's a policy reason. The second thing is a legal point, mm-hmm. and that is that the Equal Protection Clause says you have to treat everybody equally. That is, you can't say whites can get married but blacks can't. Mm-hmm. You can't say you can marry people of the same race but not different races. You can't say that heterosexuals can get married but gays and lesbians cannot. Mm-hmm. That's discrimination. On the other hand, if you say to everybody, you can only have one spouse, you're treating everybody the same. People may agree or disagree with that policy, but you're not discriminating because you're saying to everybody, you get one spouse. Mm-hmm. Now, what you couldn't do is you couldn't say, well, straight people can have 3 spouses, but gay people can only have 1. Or white people can have 3 spouses, and African Americans can only have 1. You couldn't discriminate that way.
I see.
But if you said to everybody, you can only have 1 spouse, there's no equal protection problem. There's no discrimination problem.
Well, that's beautifully explained. I didn't think there was a really good answer to that, but that's why you get the big bucks.
Thank you.
Well, what's next? What's the next civil rights struggle on the horizon? Have we solved them all?
No,
we're
I
a
don't
long ways from solving all the civil rights issues, and David has made this point in some of the conversations we've had with people, and when we talk about this book about the next civil rights or other civil rights battles, we've got to, the wonderful thing about this country is that we have these dreams, we have these ideals, and the country was imperfectly formed because of the way it treated the slaves, and periodically in our history we've had rather disgraceful episodes of discrimination and inequality, but the American people keep moving towards equality and trying to improve lives. And David and I have been talking about the fact that education is such an important issue and it's such an important right, because if we deprive the young people in this country of a quality education, we stunt their growth, we prevent them from access to the things that America stands for, and there's lots of reforms that need to be done with our education system with respect to equality and quality. Mm-hmm. And a lot of work is yet to be done with respect to that, and David and I think that maybe we might be involved in some of those efforts in the future.
Well, Mr. Olson, you were brave to take this on. I mean, you were kind of hit by 2 opposing forces on each side, the conservatives who thought you had sold out and the liberals who didn't trust you.
Well, that's true to a certain extent, but it's overcome overwhelmingly mm-hmm. by the feelings that people have expressed mm-hmm. because the efforts, however small or humble they may be with respect to our case and the things that David and I are doing have had an impact on people's lives. At least they've been telling us that, and that is so gratifying. It sort of erases anything else on the negative side.
Have you converted many from your camp, so to speak?
I have heard from lots of people who have said that I did not agree, but I have now listened, and I do agree. I appeared once on Chris Wallace's show, the Fox Sunday News, a couple of years ago after our victory in the federal district court in San Francisco, and I got a tremendous amount of email from conservatives who watched that program and said that, I didn't see it that way, and you've convinced me. Now, there's no way I can take a poll of how many people have been affected by that, but just anecdotally, people have said so. And the other thing is that the polls have changed, in some respects rather quickly across the country, including conservatives. When we talk about marriage being a conservative value, people are starting to listen. And the trends are all in the right direction. And if we've contributed a little bit to that, we're very grateful for the fact that that may have occurred.
I watched the documentary, The Case for Eight, or Case Against Eight, on HBO. It's magnificent. I'm sure you've seen it, or maybe have you had time to see it?
Oh, my goodness. We've both seen it several times. I mean, my wife and I watched it just the other night for the fifth time or something like that, and we couldn't keep our eyes off of it.
It's a great companion piece to the book.
It really is.
We think it is. We think the combination of The Case Against Eight by HBO and our book, Redeeming the Dream, tells a story in various different ways about our journey, our education, the wonderful people that we represented, the change in lives that can occur when stigmas are removed. We think that the two work very, very well together, and we hope that everyone that reads the book sees the HBO documentary, and everyone who's seen the HBO documentary will involve themselves and pick up the book and read that as well.
Well, I saw last year the Loving documentary about the Loving case, and I was shocked that they had a documentary with footage of that time, and I wondered if that documentary inspired yours.
Well, we actually we weren't sure where their case was going, but we had the filmmakers involved in our case right from the beginning. We were very, very interested in and influenced by the Loving case and the legal developments in that case and the discrimination that was involved in that case and the parallels between discrimination by states that prohibited interracial marriage and the discrimination by states that prohibit marriage between persons of the same sex. But we had really fortuitously allowed the filmmakers to be in on some of our deliberations and the entire journey of the Proposition 8 case right from the beginning. So while it wasn't inspired by the documentary, it was certainly inspired in part by the Loving case.
Well, the Loving case, I think, was similar to yours in the sense that you, the other side, you should have had the burden of proof in this, but you gave them the burden of proof. You passed it over. And so they became the defense.
Well, we felt
we really put them on the defensive.
Yeah, that's what I mean, is they took the role of the defense, and I thought that was an interesting flip that you did for them. You put them on the defense. So
right. We thought it was important to do that, and to do that early, so that we drew the battle lines and demonstrated at the beginning of the damage, the harm, the discrimination caused, the lack of a justification, and then we put to them saying, okay, what are you going to say now? And the fact is they didn't have anything to say. Yes. And when the judge pressed them as to what their justification was, how they could be arguing for any harm as a result of marriage equality, the answer was, I don't know. I don't know of any. I don't know what there is.
I love that. I mean, it was just complete capitulation.
Yep.
I got nothing.
But they had to, and that wasn't the function of bad lawyering. They were good lawyers. They worked hard. They thought about this. They tried to find something. But the fact of the matter is they couldn't find anything.
I was shocked by the kinds of ads that were run by the proponents of Prop 8 to get it passed. Wow, you talk about fear-mongering.
They were really disgraceful. I mean, they really played on people's worst fears. They were terribly unfair. They misrepresented things. They really tried to scare people. Ads that said that children were going to be threatened, ads that implied that this was going to affect what people were taught in school, that gays were not okay, and people were going to be taught that gays were really okay. I mean, it really revealed the bias and the prejudice that underscored a lot of people's views, not everybody's, but a lot of people's views in terms of the opponents of marriage equality.
Some $40 million was spent on an enormous amount of divisive propaganda. There's only no other way to describe it, and very hurtful. The people who are our plaintiffs in the case and others like them in California describe for us the impact of looking at those television ads and reading those print ads about them, and about how they were threatening. Their existence was threatening to children, and you had to protect your children from them. It's a terrible chapter in American history to see something like that happen and to understand the pain that was done. And we describe in Redeeming the Dream how it impacted us, how much we learned from that. Much of it you just don't appreciate until you start getting involved in it and listen to people describe the impact on their lives. This has been a wonderful, gratifying experience for us, but we wanted to share it with the American people, and that's why we decided to put it in a book.
Well, I know you guys have a lot of interviews, and so I thank you for spending this much time with me. I want to, before you go, I want to say to both of you that, but to David Boies in particular, that during the Gore versus Bush thing, I have a brother who's a right-wing attorney in Austin. I don't know they have many of them in Austin, but he's one. So he's Republican, I'm Democrat, and we almost came to blows over this thing. And when you lost in Florida, David, and you said, they won, we lost, we're going to appeal, that statement showed me, defeat with grace. And I learned to kind of stop getting so heated up over these things and just have rational discourse. And I think the fact that you two are able to come together and work on something also teaches us something that the U.S. Congress should be able to learn, that it's possible to get together and do good things.
Well, you're very kind, and I know part of that was addressed to David, but the working together, I think, has expressed to the American people, and people watched it, that we were opponents in that case, but we were never enemies, and I think that the legal process is benefited by people respecting the differences and the importance of the judiciary. Ultimately, at the end of the day, having the best efforts of lawyers on opposing sides presenting their respective cases in a civil way.
Yeah, I agree, and it's been great talking to you. We really appreciated this.
Well, thank you for coming on, and best of luck. And where are we now? How many states have legalized gay marriage?
You have 19 states plus the District of Columbia, but you also have about another 20 states, almost, where the courts have held that gay marriage is lawful, but that's on appeal. So you will have substantially more than half the states once these appeals are over with.
I bet Texas will be last.
Well, there's already a judge, federal district court judge that's held in Texas, so we'll see.
We'll see. All right, well, thank you, gentlemen. You'll have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you for talking about the book, and we appreciate the time that you've spent with us.
Okay. What fascinating, smart, articulate gentlemen. If I'm ever in legal trouble, I tell you, I want these guys in my legal team, but I probably have to mortgage the house to afford the first hour with them. The book, again, is Redeeming the Dream. You can listen to it on audiobooks.com or download it at all the usual places, or you can get it the old-fashioned way at a bookstore. Please watch the HBO documentary, The Case Against 8. It is mesmerizing, and you can get to see our guest today at their very best. You can also hear this show again on our Facebook page, Good Books Radio, or on our YouTube channel, Good Books Radio. I'm Dr. W.F. Strong for Good Books Radio and Audiobooks.com, wishing you a great day and hoping that all your books are good reads.